All right. Thank you for being here. Jim Marshall, I would say writer, teacher, philosopher. There's some other things I'm sure we'll talk about. What is your understanding of people?
Oh, that's a big question. The most basic certainty I have is that the person is fundamentally a spiritual being, an infinite, eternal, indestructible being. And once you have that viewpoint, it colors everything else.
Yeah. Why do you think that people exist? And I guess the same thing as that is why are we here? Why are people here?
Okay, so when you say people, do you mean humans?
Yeah, humans. Let's go with
Okay,
humans.
okay. Well, there are different explanations as to how it came about, but at some point we got this Homo sapiens system, biological system surviving on Earth, and we know most of what went on with it in about the last 6,000 years, although we know very little previous to that. And every organism in the universe has an urge to survive, and that propels it forward.
Do you have any insight or idea on why humans exist, why we're here in this form?
Well, I have a variety of ideas. The Hindu explanation of it, which I think is correct, is that beings incarnate in order to resolve one's karma. You have a karma, and you're born into the world with it, and you're here to resolve it. And to the extent that you are progressing, either in the life or lifetime to lifetime, you are resolving it. And eventually you go back to being what you might call a non dualistic being, which would be a long way off for us.
So with karma, if you're born with karma, you have like a mission, or is it something? What's the reason to be put in the human vessel, if you will, to resolve this issue? Is it just experience and perspective, or is there some other reason?
Well, the way a lot of people express it is it's basically a school. You're here to learn, you're here to figure out what you need to know in order to get yourself back to a spiritual state.
So would then existence here in this whatever we call reality, is it a punishment then? Like it was something wrong that we had to learn about some other way? Or is it just a rite of passage that everything goes through?
Well, from certain points of view, you could look at it as a punishment. But I think a better way, a more truthful way of looking at it is the Hindu way, which is that uh, they have a being, he's in a non corporeal state, and he has a karma to resolve. And he thinks that if he's born into this form, he will be able to resolve some of that karma. And that's pretty much what people are doing all the time, even if they're unaware of it.
So you have a being that is without a body as we know it, and they have this issue that they need to take care of. How do you think that issue originates? Is it something we can understand, or is it outside of our reach at this point? Like,
Oh,
why
it's
would we have a karma to resolve?
Oh, it's certainly something that can be understood. I mean, I understand it very well, which is why I had a career as a human development engineer helping people. And as a result of that career, the information that is now known as Septemics just presented itself to me, and I just wrote it down and put it in a book and put it out so people could benefit from it.
How do you feel that connection with it as far as being presented to you?
What is the antecedent of it? You said connection with it. What are you referring to exactly?
The way that you understand humanity? Septemic.
Well, I'm a polymathic scholar, so I have a deep understanding of a couple of dozen subjects. And I started working with people when I was still an undergraduate to help them. And basically, I'm helping the person resolve his karma. I mean, I don't say that, but that's what's going on. Now, there are some people who know that or who are aware of that, but whether they're aware of it or not, that's what's going on. And that's why I was good at what I did, because I understood what they were trying to do. So this applies to everybody.
But as far as when you said it was, I can't remember the exact word, revealed to you or whatever, the Septemics
Septemics.
way,
Yes.
how did that come about then?
Okay. All right. Well, the story really begins when I was accepted into engineering school at the age of 16. Now, of course, I thought at the time that I was going to be engineering physical things such as airfoils, motors, electrons, and so forth. Well, by the time I had my bachelor's degree, it was clear to me that I wanted to engineer the human psyche. And I felt this was something I could do. And so I had a long career as a human development engineer, working one on one with hundreds of clients of every description. Now, all of the clients I worked with improved as a result of our interactions. But incidentally, I started to notice that I could predict the outcome of the session. I never told this to anyone, but I made notes. And as the decades rolled by, I came to be aware that the person was at a specific level on a specific scale that I had previously observed and recorded. And as a result of our interaction, the person would go up to the next level up on that scale. Now, this happened thousands and thousands of times. Sometimes it would happen many times in the same session. And every time it did, it verified my hypothesis. So by about 1995, I had about 32 scales that I had simply observed. There's no theory of septemics. It's all direct observation. I had simply observed and wrote down. And there was one scale in particular that one of the first ones that I started to understand early in my career. And by 1995, I absolutely knew it was correct. Now, one day I was pondering a difficult client, and I realized that this client was at a level on that scale that I had not previously observed. Now, as soon as I saw what the level was, it was obvious to me where to insert it. And as soon as I inserted it into the 6-level scale, making it a 7-level scale, it manifested mathematically. Now, having taken 26 semesters of math and loved every minute of it, math is a very real thing to me. So I kind of understand what it is. And let me say something about that for some of you out there who may be allergic to mathematics. The whole point of mathematics is you start with a formula or an equation and you coax data out of it. That is exactly how Einstein found E equals mc squared. And everybody in the math and science community knows how he did it. It's not mysterious, it's just math. Now, when you have a body of data that jumps out at you, that is a mathematical manifestation because that is what math is trying to do. So when I saw this, I saw that there was math embedded in this scale because it went by itself from being a line, which is what a scale is, to a plane, meaning a whole body of data. So I suddenly had this whole body of data, and all of the components of it intersected with one another like a Chinese puzzle. And I said, whoa, I don't know what this is, but whatever the hell it is, it's natural law because anything that has mathematics embedded in it is natural law, like, for example, the Fibonacci sequence. So then I thought, I wonder how many of these other scales I have are actually 7-level scales that had not simply been developed all the way. Because you have to realize I wasn't developing anything. I was just helping my clients and making notes. So I then inspected all the other scales, knowing what I was looking for. And in a short period of time, each of them went to 7 levels. And as it did, it manifested mathematically. And I said, this looks like a new subject to me. Because having gone to school for 28 years, I never saw anything like this. So then I thought, oh, well, I could go from helping people by the hundreds, which is what I have been doing as human development engineer, to helping people by the millions if I put this in a book and get it out so people can know it. So I'm going to have to write a book. So the first draft was completed in December of 95, and I sent it out to colleagues of mine, all of whom had graduate degrees in a variety of subjects. And they all responded very positively. They had different responses, but it was extremely positive. Yes, this is great. This is beautiful. We get it, that type of thing. Now, I have to tell you, since then, 28 and a half years have gone by. Lots of people have seen this book, and I've seen them react to it. Nobody who's ever read this book has ever said, I don't get it, it doesn't make any sense, or anything like that. What they typically say is, whoa, or wow, because it's natural law. So if you compare it to, for example, the Pythagorean theorem, which is natural law, it's not hard to get. You look at it and you see it and you've got it. Or the periodic table, it's you see it and it makes sense to you and you sort of know what it's about for the rest of your life. So that's what these scales are like. There are 35 scales, and each one of them is sort of a periodic table for the corresponding subject matter. And if I may, I'd like to tell you the names of the 35 scales, and then you'll know exactly what subject matter is covered in the book.
Okay.
Takes about a minute. There are 24 scales, which I call individual scales, meaning they apply primarily to an individual. And there are 11 scales which apply primarily to groups. These are the individual scales: the scale of basic purposes, the scale of personal influence, the scale of choice, the scale of permeation, the scale of thought, the scale of identity, the scale of evaluation, the scale of motivation, the scale of control, the scale of stopping, the scale of scholarship, the scale of literacy, the scale of human ability, the scale of memory, the scale of spiritual identity, the scale of mental deletion, the scale of aberration, the scale of physical fitness, the scale of justification, the scale of belief, the scale of equanimity, the scale of attack, the scale of conflict, and the scale of reaction. And these are the group scales: the scale of relationships, the scale of life spheres, the scale of government, the scale of civilization, the scale of survival, the scale of management, the scale of exchange, the scale of communication, the scale of allegiance, the scale of sexuality, and the scale of politics. Any one of these scales by itself could dramatically improve the life of the reader. And I'll give you an example how that might work. I mentioned the scale of motivation. Motivation is one of the most important things to know about a person. If you're going to be interacting with somebody, isn't it a good idea to know what his motivation is? I mean, does this guy really want to help me, or is he some kind of a con man? See, that's motivation. So you could take that scale and you could use it to evaluate everyone you know. You could say, what is my motivation toward my wife? What is my motivation toward my boyfriend? What is my motivation toward my son? What is my motivation toward my pastor? Et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So you could use this 300, 400, 500 different times in that way. And you could also use the reverse vector, which is, what is my boss's motivation toward me? What is my girlfriend's motivation toward me? What is my son's motivation toward me? What is my next door neighbor's motivation toward me? And that way you could use it another 3 or 4 or 500 different ways. Now, by the time you finish this exercise, you are going to be a greatly clarified person, because you know the motivations of everyone around you, or even people who are deceased or you don't know anymore. And in retrospect, it's enlightening. So, yeah, that's what was going on with Joe. I haven't seen him in 40 years, but that explains our interaction. So that's just one example of how this might work.
So are those different ways to order your thought then?
Definitely, yes. This is an
Do you,
analytical system.
do you think that mathematics and thought are connected somehow, or are they two different ways to think, or is one
Well,
within the other?
well, mathematics is a particular type of thought. It's some people call it the language of God or the language of the universe, and either of those is fine with me. So, I have a very mathematical mind, and so I see math in everything. It is beautiful to me. A lot of people don't understand it and don't like it, and I understand that. So I went out of my way to write the book in such a way that math challenged people would not have an issue with that. When you read the book, you don't, there's no sense that you're looking at math. It's more like you're putting on your eyeglasses and looking at yourself in the mirror, or putting on your eyeglasses and looking at another person. So each of these 35 scales is essentially a lens that you can hold up to whatever you want to inspect or view or analyze, whether it's yourself or another.
Yeah, I see a parallel, and it made me think about when you're stretching your back or you're doing where it's easiest to do, I find, in the shower when the water's hitting each vertebrate, and then you
Uh-huh,
stretch and you think about that vertebrate individually
uh-huh,
as you're bending. Or if you have somebody point to the vertebrates, to
uh-huh,
touch the vertebrate while you're arching your back or bending your
uh-huh,
back, then you can stretch it in a way that you don't normally, because you're not thinking about it like that. You're thinking about it as the whole, if you're thinking about it at all.
uh-huh.
And so it seems like you get more clarity because you're looking at things specifically.
Right, right. It takes things from the general and puts it into the specific, which is very useful to people. So, first of all, let me give you a quick definition of septemics. So, we're talking about something precise.
Okay.
Septemics is a philosophical science based on the fact that that many phenomena related to human beings occur in a sequence of 7 levels. Literally, the word septemics means of or pertaining to 7. Septemics comprises a collection of scales or sequences, each of which breaks down various human phenomena into a hierarchy of 7 steps. There are 35 such scales, each of which is unique, and together they span the spectrum of human experience, by which I mean any problem, dilemma, situation, difficulty that has anything to do with people can successfully be analyzed by one or more of these scales, usually more than one. So it's very helpful.
Do you find that when people go through all the scales and the levels, that they then can hold on to that greater understanding, or is it
Oh, yeah.
something that you can't stay in all the time?
You hold on to it, and I'll tell you exactly why. Every time you correctly spot a level, whether it's on yourself or on another, you have a realization. Now, realize I've been working with this since long before I wrote the book. So I have decades of experience with this. Every time you look at it and you spot it correctly, you say, "Oh, now I understand why my parents can't get along," or something like that. Now, that is one of the ways that you know you found the correct level. If you just spot it and you say, "Yeah, it's level 3," and nothing happens, you found the wrong level. It's not level 3. It's another one. Because when you find the right one, you're like burrowing into a fundamental truth, because this is natural law. So it's it enhances your insight. Every time you use this correctly, you have an insight. So let me tell you in a general way how this is beneficial to people without going into specifics. I wrote this book to help people. I've had a lifetime of helping people. Each of these 35 scales provides the user with an infallible way of determining the salutariness or beneficialness of any group, individual, or activity. If the group, individual, or activity moves persons up the scales, it's beneficial or positive. If it moves them down, it's detrimental or negative. More importantly, just finding out what level you or another person is at on any scale is by itself enlightening and beneficial, which I just explained a minute ago because you have a realization. And finally, once you know the actual level, meaning you have to get it right, the actual level of a person on any scale, you can then improve that person by moving them to the next level up. I have solved the gradient problem that has bedeviled mankind for 6,000 years. And let me tell you what I mean by that. Every good teacher, coach, facilitator, therapist, etc., in the world understands that human development must be done on a gradient. You cannot make an Olympic athlete out of a couch potato. There are too many intervening levels. And that's what I did as human development engineer. I picked up the guy at the level he was at, and then I would help him move up to the next level. And he would have a realization. Oh, now I see what's going on with my wife. That's why they liked it, and it benefited them because the person has more insight and he can function better. As soon as he has that realization, his relationship with his wife just improved a little bit because he has insight into who is she? What is she doing? How is she thinking? See? So all of these advantages, basically three advantages that I just articulate, represent major steps forward for society. Each of these scales is an axis against which to evaluate human behavior, and combined, they empower one to understand, predict, and manage human affairs to a degree hitherto unattainable by most.
Are the 7 layers or 7 levels, are those scales in each level?
Yes, there are 35 scales, and every one of them has 7 levels. That's why it's called Septemics. Septem in Latin means 7.
So if you're on the individual scale of thought and you're a level 3, can you be a level 7 on some other group one?
Yes,
So you're just all over the place? You can
that's
be
right.
all over the place?
That's right. And what I can tell you about this, having collected a certain amount of demographic information, because the book has been in the hands of readers for 28 and a half years, less than 1% of the human race is at or near the top of all the scales. That would be somebody like Jesus or Gautama, founder of Buddhism, or maybe Moses. About 4% of the population is at or near the bottom of all the scales. These would be psychopaths, sociopaths, professional criminals, torturers, terrorists, people like that. Most of us are high on some scales and low on other scales. That is the norm. And so this is really valuable in helping you select people, positive and negative both. For example, I met a woman, I'm a single guy, a couple of months ago, beautiful blonde. She was very interested in me. So we're going through the usual getting to know you stuff, where do you work? What hours do you work? What do you like to do? Now, as this is going on, I'm starting to notice she's low on this scale. And then she's low on this scale. And then she's low on this scale. And then she's low. And I said, wait a minute. Do I really want to get involved with this? I dismissed her. I said, no, thanks. She was shocked. This woman was so gorgeous. I was probably the first guy who ever did that to her. Because most guys would have just jumped right in. But I know better now because I know Septemics. And this woman was going to be a lot of trouble. I could see this because she's at these low levels. So if you get somebody who's at or near the bottom of 4, 5, 6 scales, that is not somebody you want to be around.
Is
So,
is there a test you can take to kind of figure out what your like profile of what your scales are, like a Myers-Briggs type test?
well, in a sense, if you read the book, each level is detailed in a very specific way what the level is, how people at that level function, what you're like if you're at that level. So by the time you study the scale, you know, okay, people at this level do this, people at this level do that, and so forth. And so it's all done by observation. So let me give you an analogy to tell you how this works to answer your question. If you invited me to your home to see your garden, I don't even know if you have a garden, but if you do, you might say, Jim, come over and look at my garden because I like gardens. So I come over there, right? And I go, oh, TR has hydrangeas, irises, tulips, roses, peonies, chrysanthemums. Now, the reason I can do that is that I know a lot about flowers because I've been into gardening my whole life. Now, if you bring some 5-year-old kid into your garden, he's going to see and smell the same thing I do. But all he can say is, these are pretty and they smell nice. That's all he knows. Now, most people, and I mean adults, are like that little kid as regards people. They don't know what they're looking at. That is why more than 50% of the divorces in the United States end in divorce. That is why we routinely elect criminals and idiots to run our governments, because people don't understand. And I'll give you a case in point. When Obama ran for president, I, like most people, had no idea who this guy was. He had only been in the Senate for 2 years. So the people in Illinois knew who he was because they sent him to the Senate. So I said, well, this guy's running for president. I'm going to have to find out about him. So I conducted a septemic analysis of him. I had to listen to his speeches, listen carefully to what he said, how he said it, how he looked, how he moved. And after a while, it took a few weeks, I was able to spot his basic purpose. Now, what could be more important than knowing someone's basic purpose? Because that's what the person is trying to do all the time, whether he succeeds or not. And that informed me as to whether or not I wanted to vote for him. Now, I'm not going to tell you what I found because I tell everybody never tell anyone the level of any living person on any scale. It's counterproductive and unethical. In the first place, people don't like it. You know how the wife goes to the husband and says, you know what your problem is? You're not ambitious enough. You need to get a better job so you can make more money. That's not helping him. That's irritating him. It would be much more helpful if she just got a copy of the book and said, come here, look at the scale. And he'd figure it out himself. So there's another element to this, which is that when the person figures it out for himself, and it's not that hard to do, he has a realization. So he's a little bit smarter. And when you tell him, you're taking that away from him. You're short-circuiting the process. So I do give in the book actual levels of actual people who are deceased, like George Washington, Thomas Jefferson, Adolf Hitler, and so forth, to be instructive to people because it helps them understand those levels. I say, well, this guy is at that level. See, and then when they study that person, they can say, oh, okay, that's what somebody at that level is like. But I would never give the level. People ask me all the time, what's my level? Not telling anybody any levels. It's not my place. I am
But you
not.
can but you can figure out your own level.
Oh, yeah. It's not hard to figure out your own level because you know yourself. You just have to be honest enough to think your own thoughts. I'm not saying you should tell anybody.
So it seems
You
like
might
there's
go ahead.
some built-in problems because if you're figuring out what level you are yourself, you may not be capable of figuring that out because you don't know yourself enough. So you have to go through all these different things to understand your sets and levels. And then if you're trying to understand a public figure, especially, that could be difficult because you only see the public part of it, especially if you're dealing with somebody that does speeches written by other people. You're getting this amalgam of others mixed in there, and it may not be something they believe at all.
Well, let me tell you why that's not a problem.
Okay.
People tell you their levels. They tell you. It doesn't matter if they're giving a speech or taking questions, they tell you. It's not subtle. It's like the example I gave. You know, every tulip in the world is unique and every rose in the world is unique, but I can always tell a tulip when I see it, and I can always tell a rose when I see it, and I know they're very different. It's the same thing. For example, I know the basic purpose of every president of the United States, going back as far as Franklin Delano Roosevelt, and many of the presidents previous to him, such as Washington and Lincoln and Jefferson, who I studied. So you just read biographies of people, and once you know the material, it's clear. For example, I know that Thomas Jefferson was at level 3 on the scale of basic purposes. Okay, it's obvious. I've read biographies of him. Okay, he's somebody I admire greatly. I studied him carefully. He was at level 3. That's a pretty high level, and it really tells you what he's about. It also explains why he could not stand Alexander Hamilton. Okay, Alexander Hamilton was at level 2 on that same scale. Those two levels, any two levels that do not match, are going to conflict, but those two levels really conflict. And it got to the point where Jefferson just quit as Secretary of State. He couldn't stand being around Hamilton, who was the Secretary of the Treasury. I mean, Hamilton was almost like Washington's son. They were really close, with good reason, because Hamilton was brilliant. He was the smartest of all three of them. And of course, I studied Hamilton, and in his case, it's really obvious that he's at level 2 on the scale of basic purposes. It's not subtle. It's just like looking at a rose. You know right away, oh yeah, it's a rose. You're not going to think it's a tulip if you know anything about flowers. So people tell you they can't conceal it even if they want to. But let me tell you something else about this. The people who have trouble using this material are people who are at or near the bottom of that scale. You see, when a person is at or near the top of a scale, it's because he's insightful in that area. When a person is at or near the bottom of that scale, it's because he lacks insight in that area. So let's say you get some guy who's a professional criminal, some thug, small time robber. Okay. He's going to be at or near the bottom of some of those scales. That's why he's a professional criminal. His insight into things is very poor. So now I'm not saying he's going to be at or near the bottom of all the scales. That probably won't be true. But some of those scales, he's going to be at or near the bottom. He's not going to be able to understand that scale or work with it. I've been watching this for about 30 years. That's what happens. If somebody's at the bottom, he doesn't have a clue about that. It's not going to help him. And that's actually good, because what that means is the people who are destructive are not going to be able to use this material to help them because they don't get it. Now, most of us that are high on some scales and low on others, and I could give you examples if you like.
I would think a psychopath, from my 80s understanding of psychopath, because I think they've changed the definitions around a little. My understanding when I was learning about it in school is psychopath is a person that doesn't have empathy but can fake it. And a sociopath is a person that doesn't have empathy and can't fake it. So a sociopath would stick out more, a psychopath would blend in.
Yeah,
And I think
I never heard that before. That's interesting.
I think they've mixed that together and have a different definition of what a psychopath is these days.
Yeah,
But I would think on the scale of like driven and purpose, a psychopath would be pretty high. And then on other scales, they would be low. So you'd end up with a profile of it. Is that not how it works?
no. Every person has one of 7 basic purposes. And if you look at that scale, tells you what those 7 basic purposes are. Now, all the others that you could come up with are simply subsets of those. Uh, in other words, I got the right word to reduce it to the common denominator for that level. And there's maybe 100 different other words that are going to fit into that level. But once you find your level, it's a life-changing experience. That's my basic. That's what I'm about. And you throw out the other 6 because they're not for you. They don't apply to you. Now, anybody who's a psychopath, a sociopath, a narcissist is going to be at or near the bottom of that scale because that person doesn't have a high purpose. That person has a low purpose. As an example, Adolf Hitler is at level 7 on that scale. Okay, his purpose was to destroy. That is the purpose of somebody at level 7. Fortunately, there aren't too many of those people, but that explains a lot. You know, when I'm a serious student of military science and history, and when I was studying World War II, I would see he did this, he did this. I was scratching my head because we all know from studying military science, which has been around for thousands of years, there's certain things you do and certain things you don't do. Well, he violated those basic tenets. And I'm saying, why would he do that? Well, now I know why. Because he was destructive. He wasn't only destructive to the Allies, he was destructive to the Wehrmacht. He was destructive to Germany. He was destructive to his own family. That's what you get from a destructive person. Destruction.
Is 7 high or is 7 low?
7's at the bottom.
Okay. So 1 is if you're 1 at everything, that's your more Jesus type side.
Right.
Okay. All right. It's weird because as you were talking, I was thinking about it as in when you were saying that you put it into, you have these 7 things and they're derivative or parts of that. And then you put it into words that could be understood, going back to the idea of mathematics being a language. And then started thinking about, well, if you put a value to everything on these scales, then you end up with this mathematic type equation of personality type or where you are at any given time. And maybe that's how you get your karma established and you say, okay, you're starting off life at this is your programming for it. You could reduce it to binary, zeros and ones. And then you're looking at something like the matrix, it seems. And then if we are inside of a reality that's created, whether it is a simulation or reality, or maybe those 2 things mean the same thing, that you could explain it all as we're just data trying to resolve itself in some larger computation. But maybe I'm overthinking that.
Well, it'd probably be wise to read the book first before you try to figure out what it is.
Okay.
Because let me tell you something. I went out of my way to make this comprehensible to the average reader of English. I worked on this book for 25 years. Remember, I told you in 95, I finished the first draft of it in December of 95, and then I worked on it for the next 25 years. And the reason for that is first, I had to develop the phenomena. In other words, find the septemic phenomena. Now, I pretty much told you already how that happened, although I did find 3 more skills as I was writing the book. Then I had to take that data and use it to craft a workable philosophic system. That's what engineers do. Okay, they take known data and then they use it to make some kind of a machine that works. And that is what this is. It's an intellectual machine. And you can put data into it and you get something very specific and it's useful to you. So I can absolutely guarantee that if you understand this book, it will prevent catastrophes, dilemmas, bankruptcies, divorces, indictments, fistfights, et cetera, et cetera. Because when you run into somebody like that, you say, whoa, this guy is at level 6 or 7. I'm not going to mess with this. Have a nice day. Goodbye. The opposite happens too. You spot somebody who's very uptone. Now, I have somebody I met about 9 years ago. Never met this person before. We had a conference. I could see this was an upscale person. This person was high on many of these scales. The book wasn't even published then. So, because it's only been out like 3.5 years. But still, I knew the data. And I've been associated with this person ever since, and it's been very positive. Now, I'm not saying this person is at or near the top of all the scales. As I said, there's very few. She has some lower scales, but I know what they are, and so I can tiptoe around them and therefore maintain our relationship. So, for example, I have a friend, wonderful person, made a lot of money, raised his family, didn't get in any trouble, kind of an ideal citizen or an exemplary citizen in many ways, who happens to be what I would call a political extremist. Now, if you read the scale of politics, I say those are the people who cause most of the trouble, the extremists. So when the subject comes up, I know this guy is at this level. I just sort of tiptoe around it. And in doing so, I'm able to preserve our relationship. So, for example, I have 3 sisters. 2 of them are conservatives, and 1 of them is a liberal. I get along great with all of them because I don't make it an issue. I just tiptoe around it. And that is what you can do when you know somebody well. You know where the person is. This person is low on this scale. I'm not going to go into that. See? I'll just let that go by. Just say, okay, fine, and go on to something else. Because as I said, most people are high on some skills and low on others. So before I even had Septemics, my philosophy was find the best in the person and focus on that, whatever that is. Like, for example, if I have somebody come in to clean my house, which I do regularly, I have had a variety of housekeepers. None of them are terribly literate people. There's a scale of literacy. I mean, they're not on the scale of literacy on a level with William F. Buckley or Noam Chomsky or Jordan Peterson. Those are very literate people, okay? Even though they're very different from one another. So that informs how I communicate with these people. You see, I had clients who came to me from Europe for whom English was a second language. So I had to be careful in working with them to use words that they understood and make sure they understood what I was saying. Now, if I did not know that, I might have made a mistake and not handled them correctly. See, so knowing somebody's level, it's not hard to do, and it's very useful. And let me give you an example of how easy and useful this is. Let's say you have a couple, they've been going out for a couple of years, right? They're talking about getting married. Wouldn't it be smart for those people to ask themselves, why does this person want to marry me? I mean, isn't that a reasonable question? I'm not saying you should ask the partner that. I'm saying you should get out the book, and you've been hanging around with this person for 2 years. You know them. You analyze them against the scale. If you study the scale, it's pretty clear, okay? And you find their level. So let's say the guy does this analysis and he figures out, well, she wants to marry me because she loves me. That's level 1. That's the highest level. That's the best motivation. Okay, let's set the date. But maybe that doesn't happen. Maybe he says, now that I think about this, maybe she wants to marry me because I drive a Lamborghini, I fly my own Learjet, I live in a $15 million condo, I have a 60-foot yacht, and I have $10 million in the bank. See, that's a different motivation. I'm not evaluating it or judging it. I'm just saying it's different. Now, he might look at it and say, well, yeah, she loves me for my money, but you know what? I love this girl, so I'm going to marry her anyway. That could happen. Or he might say, you know what? This woman is a gold digger. I don't want to marry a gold digger. I want to marry somebody who loves me for myself, and they break up. Now, you might think he would be unhappy about that, and you would be wrong. He will be relieved. He will say, "Thank you, TR, for showing me this scale. It got me to dodge a bullet. You got me out of this before I wound up owing this woman $15,000 a month in alimony." So no matter what level you find, you're always happy with it because it's natural law. It's just telling you who you are. And again, I'm not saying you have to tell people what it is. They might have their own opinions. Don't tell people, keep it to yourself. I go through this all the time with readers and friends of mine. I say, "What? You want to know what my level is? You have the book, figure it out." It's not hard to do.
How do the average people of the world deal with the level sevens of the world? Individually, I understand you're not around them, but how do you deal with the level sevens that want to destroy everything?
Well, first of all, I should say every scale is unique. So the meaning of level 7 is different for each of the scales. So it depends on the scale. So you cannot infer anything about scale A by studying scale B. There's no horizontal correlation here. So you have to take the scale by itself. Okay, so this guy's at this level, so that informs me. Maybe that's relevant, maybe it isn't. For example, if I'm going to get somebody to edit a book for me, I want that person to be highly literate. But if I'm going to get somebody to be my gardener, he doesn't have to be literate. He could be at level 5. What do I care? Does he know how to take care of the grounds and the flowers and the trees? He does. That's good enough. So my mechanic and my housekeeper and all these people, they are not high on the scale of scholarship, not high on the scale of literacy. Those are two different things. But that's fine. Like I have a guy who works in my car. He's like a genius. He works on race cars. We're talking about a brilliant mechanic. Okay. I take my car. I trust him. I know by now he's going to tell me whatever's wrong with it and he's going to fix it. And so, what do I care if he's low on the scale of this or that? You see, now you could say, well, the scale of human ability, I could say, as a mechanic, he's high on the scale of human ability. Level 3 is expert. He is an expert, okay? That's what I want. I want an expert to work on my car. Or same thing with a gardener. I had a friend of mine, he had a gardening business. This was not a terribly well-educated person, but boy, did he know about gardening and landscaping. He knew everything there was to know, every tiny little flower and bug and everything. And he did very well in that. So if I had any question about anything related to gardening or landscaping, he's the guy I went to. But I didn't ask him what he thought of Oswald Spengler. He has no idea who Oswald Spengler is because he doesn't read philosophy. So it's very specific, and that's good because it fits your situation. So, for example, I gave an example of a woman who wants to marry a guy because he has a lot of money, right? So let's say you have a car dealership and you're hiring a new salesman. So you're talking to this guy, and it comes out through his rhetoric that he's a money motivated person. That's good. That's what you want because he's going to be out there hammer and tongs selling those cars to get his commission. That's what you want. Great, you're hired. See, you might not want that in a wife, but some people might accept it in a wife. Did you notice how many beautiful young women are married to ugly, dumpy old guys?
Mm-hmm.
There's a lot of these. Often I see this. I see some guy, he's overweight, he's gray, there's nothing attractive, and he's got this beautiful young wife. How does this work? I'll tell you how it works. The 23-year-old beauty queen gets a diamond ring, a pearl necklace, a Corvette, a credit card, and a mink coat. And the guy gets a 23-year-old beauty queen for a wife. That's the deal. And they're both happy. So she comes to him and says, honey, I want to go to Vegas this weekend. He says, fine, here's $5,000. Have a good time. I'll see you Monday. He doesn't care. See, she's grateful because he's being generous. See, and he gets rewarded. So it works for him. So there's no judgment in any of this. It's just seeing what's there and using it to your advantage. So when somebody is high on the scale, he's going to have no trouble using that scale. When someone is at or near the bottom of the scale, he will have trouble with that scale. It doesn't make sense to him because he's not insightful. That's why he's at or near the bottom of the scale.
If you could have a meal with 5 people, alive or dead, I mean, at the meal, they would be alive if they are dead now. They're not going to be dead at the meal. You get it?
Mm-hmm.
And language is not an issue. Everybody can understand each other.
Mm-hmm.
Who would the 5 people be that you choose?
Okay. There would be Jesus, Gautama, Lao Tzu, Moses, and Socrates.
Interesting.
Mm-hmm.
Be quite the conversation.
Yes. You may remember Steve Allen had a TV show in the 70s in which he had actors come in playing historical characters, about a half a dozen different people, and sitting around a table and talking. I don't know if you ever saw that show. It was called Meeting of the Mind.
Oh, okay. I've heard of that. Okay.
Yeah. And it was very interesting. So you
Did
get to
the-
see, what would Socrates say to Thomas Paine and vice versa?
Yeah, that's interesting.
Mm-hmm.
When you were putting the book together, did you find that it was more research than writing, or over the 25 years of the draft and then redoing it, how did you divide your time up to keep going? Were you looking at different topics, so it's mainly research, or were you revising exposition?
Well, I pretty much started from having the scales. I pretty much told you how in 95, I was able to piece them all together after working with this material for many decades. So I had the scales, but scales are not enough. You have to have a whole body of data in order for it to be useful. So let's say you look at, for example, the scale of control. Control is a really big issue for most people. See, you look at it and you see how it all fits together. Oh, yeah, you study it, and then you can see, okay, this guy's at this level, and this tells you something. I mean, this goes on in the military all the time, okay? I mean, in the Navy, I know a lot about the military. I have a lot of contacts and some experience in the military. If they're going to give you a ship, make you the captain of a ship, that is a big deal. I mean, they go over you with a fine-tooth comb because you are going to have the lives of the crew in your hands, not to mention a multi-billion-dollar vessel. So those guys are carefully selected. So there are sometimes guys who are very smart, follow all the laws, are respectful, etc., but they never get a ship because the people in charge have qualms about turning a ship over to them. So it's this type of evaluation that goes on here where you're looking at all of the aspects of somebody. All right, this person is low on this scale. All right, I can live with that. I'll give you an example. My mother used to say, she's deceased now, she used to say, Bill Clinton is a bad man, but a good president. Now, most people know exactly what she's talking about. Bill Clinton, everybody knows, is a very smart man. That's obvious to anybody who's been paying attention in the last 30 years, 35 years. But he's the last president ever to sign a balanced budget. He did it 4 times. Nobody's ever done it since. So you can't say he was a bad president. But everybody knows he's a serial abuser of women. That is not a secret. All right. That's how he got impeached, because they sued him and he took the stand and he perjured himself and suborned perjury. And that's what he was impeached for. That's what got to the Senate, those two counts. Okay. And that's why he was disbarred. You can't be a perjurer if you're a lawyer. So all I'm saying is, on the scale of human ability in his profession, he's obviously at a high level. I'm not going to say what level. And in the scale of sexuality, he's definitely at a low level, or else he wouldn't treat women that way. Now, JFK was a womanizer too, but he did not abuse women. He was not an abuser of women. He was just a guy who liked to have a lot of fun. Okay. And he had a deal worked out with Jackie, and nobody spilled the beans. Okay. So they were comparable, very smart men, both kind of doing the same serial adultery, but one of them got in a lot of trouble and the other one didn't, because JFK was not low on the scale of sexuality. He was just a fun-loving guy, as opposed
It's a
to
hot take. It's a hot take.
Hmm?
Um, so then the idea of karma then, is that, are we talking about going through this human existence multiple times, or just one time through and that's it?
Well, the Hindus believe in reincarnation, and they say that uh, you're born to try to resolve your karma, and then whatever part of it hasn't gotten resolved, you come back again to try to resolve that. And that idea essentially was carried into Buddhism. I mean, Siddhartha Gautama was a Hindu before he was the founder of Buddhism, so all that got carried in.
Mhm.
So that's their view, and there are other religions that think that too. So I'm not taking a position on that particularly, but uh, I'm an intellectual, so my position is I study everything, and I do not have opinions very much. In other words, I know what the material says, I know what all these religions teach, and that's enough for me. I don't have to tell anybody what I think or what they should do, and I don't.
What takes up most of your time these days?
Well, I have a lot going on. I've done over 300 interviews on the book, and they're all time consuming one way or another. I mean, the actual interview itself is not the whole thing. There's the before and there's the after. That's one thing. Plus, I have students. I'm still teaching. I started school at the age of 3, and I've been involved in education one way or another my entire life to this day. So I'm still doing some tutoring. Also, I'm an investor. I have many financial assets. And for those of you who are not investors, having a financial asset is a little bit like being a parent. You can't, or maybe a gardener. You can't just plant it and go away. You have to pay attention. So when you have over 100 different assets, it takes some time to go through. How's this one doing? How's this one doing? And then you have to cross-reference it against all the data that comes in. I do research. Plus, I have a son, an adult son who I'm very close to, and I own a home. So, all these things take a certain amount of time. Plus, the most important thing to me is I've been meditating every day for 40 years. And I've been working out every day since I was about 12. So that takes time every day. And that's really important to me.
Do you find a connection with the more creative side of thought when you're working out?
When I'm working out, one of the reasons I like it and do it is I kind of shut off my computer. It doesn't take much to go 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay, now the next one, 1, 2. You know, uh, Or if I'm jogging, I used to be a jogger. Now I hurt my back. I can't jog, but I walk. It's the same thing. It's like, that's when I'm not thinking. I'm just, if I'm walking, oh, there's a bird, that's pretty, there's a rabbit, I just enjoy it and focus on walking at a high rate and breathing deeply. It's a workout.
Hmm.
Take some attention.
Yeah. What's the best way?
For those
Go
of you
ahead.
who don't work out, if you don't pay attention when you're working out, you're going to hurt yourself. That's how you hurt yourself. You got to pay attention. If you let your attention slip while you're lifting weights, sooner or later you're going to hurt yourself.
Hmm.
Now, of course, anybody who does anything athletic knows sooner or later you're going to get hurt, whether it's a strain or whatever, a bruise. It happens. So it's a question of, you want to really focus on what you're doing and do it right and not screw it up. You can, if you drop a weight on your foot, you get a broken toe, so you got to pay attention.
What's the best way for people to follow your work?
Well, I want to invite your viewers to my website, which is septemics.com, Septemics, where you can see what many readers have said, what many journalists have written, what the reviews are. You can read sections of the book itself. And if you want, you can listen to a pre-recorded introduction to Septemics, which explains the subject to a new person in about 15 minutes. Or if you prefer, you can read a similar essay called Achieve Your Goals Faster and Easier with Septemics, and it explains it in an essay. So if you look at all that, you're probably going to want to buy the book, because people are blown away by this. I've been really very, I didn't really know, when I released this, what kind of a response I was going to get. Although I told you when I sent the first draft out, I got a great response. But people just flip over this book. They love it. This is a life-changing book. It changes your life because it opens your eyes to things you never thought about. And then it enables you to analyze people, yourself and others both, according to that scale. And there are 35 different ways to do it. So it's very useful.
Where's the best place to get the book?
Well, if you just type the word Septemics into a search engine, you'll get hundreds of responses, including all the people selling the book, which include Amazon, Barnes and Nobles, etc. It's not a hard book to find.
Okay.
If you just
So
go
it's
to
not,
Amazon and put in Septemics, the book will come right up.
it's not something you prefer, the purchases through your website or anything like that?
No.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm a distinctly non-materialistic person. I have devoted my entire life to basically what I've been associating with throughout my life is intellectuals, artists, and clergy of across the spectrum, many types, because that's what's fascinating and compelling to me. So I'm a notoriously non-mercenary person. But I do want to say one sentence to sort of bring this into focus, to give people an idea in one sentence what this is about. The data in this book are vital for every person and can help you to achieve your goals faster and easier by explaining what might otherwise seem to be inexplicable or random. So if you talk to most guys, they'll tell you they don't understand women, like a guy loves his wife, but he doesn't understand her. Why does she do that? Well, if he were to analyze her across 35 axes, he would understand her very well. That would not be an issue anymore.
All right. Well, in the show notes, I have your website and a couple other links for articles and such about the book. And it's available on Amazon and other booksellers. Any thoughts in closing beside what you just said, or any other topics that you wanted to cover that we didn't?
Well, it was a pleasure meeting you, a pleasure talking to you. You give a very good interview. You're a good interviewer.
Well, thank you. Thank you. And thank you for your time. I'll talk to you on the other side of this musical exit.
Okay.
All right.